spoken at, and that is, there's all this wonderful genealogy, right? Handlin, Bodner, Herbert Gutman, and things like the uprooted, the transplanted, the dislocated, and then with Gutman we have to say work, culture, society, right? Isn't this story also about the global circulation of capitalism, really? And I would like all of you actually to speak a little bit about immigration laws and how they have reflected the kinds of laborers that the United States has, and other places have required over time, that can help also, I think, to explain why people are uprooted in the first place, are transplanted, are dislocated, and how you see this playing itself out as part of the larger national narrative.
Well, Handlin's example from the colonial period, I think that's fascinating that he, imprints labor migration upon that. But of course, it's all that. Look, Ellis Island. I've been a consultant at Ellis Island since 3 years, and I keep telling these people they're finally getting it. That there's going to be another iteration of Ellis Island, which is I want to get back to what you said because it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. They're finally bringing new immigrants in, post-World War II. But what I kept telling people is, look, this is simply about a labor market, and it's simply about keeping sick people out and people likely to become a public charge. I mean, that's a big part of the immigrant saga, and Handlin wrote about that. Of course he did, yeah. But I don't think he would see it as John Bodner would see it more according to that model of, developing capitalism. So that my generation and his generation, I think, would see it that way. What do you think, Jose?
I mean, it's obvious the connection to capitalism. It came at the same time. I think it's broader than capitalism, actually. Capitalism is only a reflection of something that is happening that I call, instead of modernization, I use the term massification. Because if you look at it, that is what has been happening since the early 19th century. At all levels, we forget that, it took humanity 15,000 generations to reach the first billion in 1804. We added another billion in 5 generations, not 15,000, 5. And then we keep on adding 1 more billion every half of a generation, about a dozen years, right? So this is unprecedented. This is bigger than capitalism. Capitalism is simply a way of organizing this. Free labor, actually, not commerce. Commerce has existed before. But the same thing with production. More important is the massification of production. The economic history of humanity, at grosso modo, is as simple as the demographic history. Almost no growth for most of 99% of our history. The world in 1900, the per capita wealth of the world was similar to what it had been 1,000 years before, or 2,000 years before. In the last 200 years, it has multiplied by 12. And it has multiplied unequally, right? Geographically unequally. So when we think of push and pull factors, is a creation of this right process, right? That their wages are 5 times higher. Now, what is interesting is that extreme poverty rarely creates migration because you need resources to migrate, particularly long distance, right? And I think it has become more so today. One of the distinctions between the European migration and migration today that people tend to forget is the existence of a group of immigrants who are much, much better than natives. The per capita income of people, Indian immigrants from South Asia, is about $20,000 higher than white Americans. That didn't exist before. 20% of the new immigrants are professionals with college degrees, and 45% of nuclear physicists or whatever in the United States are immigrants. We tend to think of immigrant, someone washing dishes. There is that other side, right? That is new. Like I said, 20% with college education, high training today. In 1900, the one that Handlin was talking about, less than 1%. So that's also, it's more complicated, right? It's more.
I know you're curious about all sorts of things, so ask away.
I have a question. Among young people in recent years, Latinos in particular I'm talking about, at least in Brooklyn, can't say about anywhere else, there's this notion that, immigrant is a bad word, so that they say, you immigrant,
Yeah.
right? And so you know what that means. Even though it's not a bad word, it is said in the context and with the insinuation that it is a bad word. We also have, nationally, that when you think of immigrants, the media has sort of shaped our understanding that they're all undocumented Mexicans. So there's no other types of undocumented immigrants, and that they forget that they're actually legal immigrants living here too. So when they talk about immigrants, sort of the images, or those are the first images you have. Can you speak to what I said, some of that, perhaps, and also to the notion that because of this economic time that we're in as well, there seems to be, again, right, the whole massive deportation as a scapegoating. Can you talk about the scapegoating of immigrants, perhaps historically and today?
Well, I mean, it's clear, one of the things that Handlin said is that each new wave of immigrants pushed the others up, right? Those who had preceded them up. That hasn't happened now in recent migration. As you're talking about all of the professional migrations that have occurred, and again have occurred as a result of government policies that have permitted that, and have actually are heading more and more in that direction to the massive abuse of H-1B visas in this country, and all other attempts to basically craft the population that will be coming into the country. But I think that the image of the uneducated or the poor immigrant that is coming here as undocumented. Again, I go back to Mexico. Mexico a few years ago became the largest source of legal immigration into the United States since the United States started keeping immigration figures in 1820. More Mexicans have legally come to this country than have the Irish or the Italians or any other group, and that's just a legal immigration, and it's perfectly understandable. When you have a country of 100 million people that's still, unfortunately, while developing in third world conditions, sharing a contiguous land border with the richest country in the world, having a joint economy to all intents and purposes, that's going to continue. Unless the economic level of Mexico is raised. It's the only way that the migration will be changed. Look, Puerto Rico, I was born in Puerto Rico, and of course Puerto Rico is never considered part of the immigration issue. But it is, because obviously Puerto Ricans who migrate as U.S. citizens are still seen by many in the country as foreigners. Puerto Rico had a net loss of population in the last decade. The new census of 2010 says there are 4.1 million people in Puerto Rico. The 2000 census said there were 4.2 million people in Puerto Rico. So there's been a net loss in the population of Puerto Rico in the last decade. And the Puerto Rican population of the U.S. in 2000 was 3.8 million. It's now gone up to 4.6 million. So there's obviously people are fleeing Puerto Rico, coming to the United States. It's the only way you can explain. People in Puerto Rico did not stop having children. And there is a new surge of migration from Puerto Rico to the United States as a result of the economic condition. And yet, those folks are American citizens who are not even counted in the normal migration numbers that are dealt with other Latin Americans. So I think that the image of the Puerto Rican is still as a foreigner, because that's and I think this whole issue of migration and the psychological impact of being neither here, ni de aquí ni de allá, where I am from neither here nor there. I am in this process of becoming something new, and so I think that the country trying to come to grips with this is increasingly looking at migration. Unless you're a professional migrant, as a problem to be dealt with, rather than as a source of renewal of the economy, of renewal of cities. That's the reigning narrative, although it began to change a little bit following the 2006 protests. You started getting a little bit more human portrayals of the immigrant experience in the country. But I think that, uniformly, rather than celebrate the nation of immigrants, because now this whole issue of legality becomes, oh no, we're not against all immigrants, we're just against illegal or undocumented immigrants. Well, everyone in the United States is illegal from the perspective of the Native Americans. Everyone is illegal. So it's, this whole issue of legality and illegality is a question of political decisions that were made at particular times in the history of the country as to who would be legal and who would not be legal. Because when the Bracero program was established during World War II, as a means of getting more labor because you couldn't get European immigrants, it was fine to bring in as many Mexicans as you could at that point, from 1942 to 1964, because they were needed. The Bracero program was important. But now the same Mexicans who used to come to work under the legal Bracero program are now illegal. Because why? Because the laws were changed. So, these policies have a lot to do with, obviously, there's been battles over immigration policy throughout the history of the United States. And policies have a lot to do with how you frame the issue of immigration.
Could I add something to that, to the illegality? I mean, illegality actually has replaced open racism as for in the 1920s when the quota laws were, no one talked about illegality because there was no few restrictions. They talk openly about inferior races. That is not acceptable anymore, but legality is, right? Now, the other thing about legality, that there is a huge irony, particularly in the case of Mexicans. Because it is illegal to cross that border, but how did that border get there? By an illegal and violent aggression and appropriation of Mexican territory. And the other thing that is quite ironic about, particularly about Mexicans, is that Mexicans are Mexicans nationally, nationality. But in terms of ethnicity, a lot of them, and particularly today that they're coming from southern Mexico, are Native Americans. So to tell Native Americans that they're illegal immigrants, well, the quotient of irony there is quite high.
I think one of the important things to add just quickly is that while we'd love to think of ourselves as a nation of immigrants, I mean, we've also always been a nation of gatekeepers, and you can jump into any point in the stream in American history and find some version of that, and usually some really vitriolic, ugly version of that. And that's a piece of our history that is, I think, conveniently hidden by the formation nation of immigrants. So we can use that paradigm to actually lament the bad new immigrants, even while we celebrate the good old immigrants. But the whole edifice is kind of occluding this history of gatekeeping and the various mechanisms by which, the Bracero program, for example, was not just a program to bring people here, it was a program to make sure that we could expel them when the time came, right? And so there are all kinds of mechanisms of guarding very jealously our borders and our notions of citizenship, and that we don't really tell ourselves that story very much.
I want to add something also about occluding, which to me is absolutely stunning. You will love this one. I tell my students one of the most important dates in American history. I ask them to pick. Depends on which class it is, what I say. If it's a women's history class, I say the date the birth control pill. And that they think that's very funny. But it's true. And think of what that did in Puerto Rico, right? Okay. But historically, the census, is it 2000 or 2010? 2000 census, we knew that Latinos were replacing African Americans as the majority minority, okay? Now, this is, to me, so important, and for some reason, it's not penetrating, but I want to follow up on that in a minute. The other thing is, if you look at the census maps, which I have done, okay, what you can see is that the South is no longer biracial, okay? The other, this is of historic significance. We're talking about the change in the history of this country that is awesome, okay? The other thing you can see is that if you go down the center of the United States, which is an area that has never been penetrated by much of anything foreign, you see the red dots showing Latinos are showing up in places like Butte, Wyoming,
Dodge City, Kansas.
And then the other thing that's happening concurrently with this, which I think is fascinating, is that you now have states, which are politically bounded entities, it's true, but they're useful, which no longer have a majority-minority population. So you get, in the Washington, D.C. area, a very different, very complicated demographic. If you look at the state of New Jersey, where the majority-minority has been Italian immigrants, right? You see, coming from your part of the world, huge, not only Latinos, but people from Asia, okay? So this is really a critical moment. Now my question has been, and it's you journalists who have done something like this, I've been sitting around saying, so when are the Republican Party gonna wake up? Because you've got high birth rates. What I'm doing is taking your statistics about the future of the population and putting it in a political context. And so like 2 weeks ago, there was not one, but 3 articles out talking about how the Republican Party is very aware of this, and they see this election as their last chance to, get hold of everything, including, of course, the Supreme Court. God help us, they're already on their way. And so their strategy has been secretly, they've been thinking about this. I mean, think of what it's going to do to the gerrymandering that's going on. Then I hear this thing, which you can comment on, Juan, and Jose, since it's your countryman, that they're pushing Rubio for vice president, the Republicans. Now, obviously, what that is about,
There's been a battle within the Republican Party now for quite a while between the far-thinking ones and the immediatists who are over this issue. And obviously, George Bush, when he was president, was cognizant of that and really attempted to have a more reasoned immigration policy. And what people don't realize is that in the last election, there were significant inroads of the Republican Party in the 2010 election into the Latino community.
Right.
You had Susana Martinez, who's a Republican, win the governorship in New Mexico since Bill Richardson was leaving. You had Sandoval, a Republican, win the governorship of Nevada. You had Rubio, a Republican, win the U.S. Senate seat in Florida. You had a Republican Puerto Rican named Labrador win a congressional seat in Idaho. How that happened, I have no idea. And you also had another Republican Latino in the state of Washington win a congressional seat, because the Republican Party actively went out in the 2010 election to find conservative Republicans to run in those areas, because they knew that that would give them some kind of an edge in terms of being able to win. Unfortunately, the Democrats didn't also say, hey, yes, this demographics is real, but we've got to begin changing, the kinds of folks that we run. So there has been a significant, in the last election, now whether that will hold true, especially with all of the stuff that's happened now in terms of the current crop of Republican candidates at the top of the tick, I doubt that will happen. But there was an effort in the last election to do that.
But what happens if our new Latino immigrants buy into this American, nation of immigrants thing? I mean, this is really, I would think the inclination would be to vote Democratic.
Well, I think one of the things that's very important that people don't normally keep track of is that the evangelical Pentecostal movement
Right,
among
right.
Latinos
Right.
is a very strongly pro-immigrant movement and actually helped organize a lot of these protests of 2006. So to the degree that the social conservatives within the Republican Party continue to push anti-immigrant, they're going to run up against the social conservative Hispanics who believe that that party is now associated with anti-immigrant positions. And that's gonna make it very hard, I think, for them to, unless they change on this issue of how they view immigration. Especially when you go after college kids, refuse to even say, hey, pass the DREAM Act, stuff like that. It grates against the evangelical Hispanic Christian movement.
Well, thank you very much. We need to feed our incredible guests. What do you think? If you would
And
like
ourselves.
And ourselves. So if you would like to join us for lunch, the International Room at Subo, please come and we can talk more. It's latest poets, right? Or suggestions.